I can still remember the moment my life spun out of control, as if someone hit pause and every detail froze in high definition. There was this deep shine on the hardwood floor of my parents' house in Chicago. My boots, worn from years in the army, almost looked out of place against its perfect polish. It was supposed to be a quiet morning, the kind you tell yourself will be ordinary, just another day living back at home while my shoulder healed. But I should have known that with my sister Ashley around, nothing would ever be truly ordinary. One second, I was reaching the top of the stairs, carrying my mug of coffee, thinking about how I'd write my next cover letter. The next, all I felt was a violent shove right in my chest. I hadn't seen Ashley coming. She moved quietly, like she always did when she was planning trouble. My body floated for a split second, weightless, my arms flailing. Then gravity took over and I was tumbling, end over end, down the entire flight. I counted 20 steps later, while I lay on the landing gasping for breath, my head spinning from the impact. Every part of me hurt, but it was my ribs that screamed the loudest. The shock was like being back on the training field, only worse. I tried to move, but a blinding, sharp pain shot through my side and I let out a sound somewhere between a groan and a gasp. My mouth tasted like blood. The coffee mug, a souvenir from Fort Benning, lay shattered beside me. And then I heard Ashley's voice, not scared, not worried, just perfectly calm, like she was reading from a script. She slipped, as she called out, raising her voice just enough for anyone in the house to hear. "It was those socks, Mom." The socks. She always needed something to blame. Maybe if I'd been barefoot or wearing combat boots, she'd have found a way to twist that, too. My mind was fuzzy, but my anger started to burn even through the pain. I tried to get up, to shout the truth before her lie took root, but every attempt sent another wave of agony through my body. A moment later, my parents came rushing in. My father, Stephen, a respected lawyer in the city, knelt beside me, but not with the warmth of a dad worried for his child. He looked annoyed, almost inconvenienced, as he glanced at the slick wood and my still form. "You need to be more careful on these stairs, Jessica," he said sharply. "Those socks are dangerous." My mother, Claire, hovered over Ashley, checking her for injuries as if I had been the one to lash out. My chest tightened, but not just from the pain in my ribs. It was that old, cold fury, the one I'd known since childhood, when Ashley could do no wrong and my words barely mattered. Even then, lying there, my military training kicked in. Assess, breathe, move if you can. But every breath felt like my ribs were being stabbed from the inside out. I stared up at the ceiling, watching the fancy chandelier sway from the commotion. I wanted to scream at them, to force them to see what had really happened. But the truth was, in our family, the truth was whatever Ashley said it was. That had been the rule for as long as I could remember. Ashley stood 2 steps above, arms folded, eyes cold and calculating. There was no fear in her gaze, only a confidence that my parents would believe anything she said. They always had. She never worried about consequences. That was for me. She didn't know that this time, things were different. This wasn't a ruined school project or a sweater stretched out of shape. This was my body, broken. The evidence was in my bruises, my blood, the shattered mug, the awkward angle of my shoulder. I tried once more to get up, my mind racing through every emergency scenario I'd ever trained for, but nothing could prepare me for the pain. My father's voice sounded distant as he called for an ice pack, as if that could fix the mess Ashley had made. It's strange, the things you notice when you're hurt. I saw Ashley's shoes, perfectly clean, shiny, not a speck of dust. Her face was expressionless, her lips pressed in a line. I realized, with sudden clarity, that she'd step right over me if she needed to. She always had. But for the first time in my life, as I lay at the bottom of those stairs, I knew I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not again. Growing up, people in our leafy Chicago neighborhood would tell me how lucky I was to have such a wonderful family. They saw the big red brick house with the wraparound porch and flower beds that overflowed in summer. They saw my dad in his sharp suits shaking hands at city events, my mom laughing behind the counter of her coffee shop, Ashley's bright smile in the yearbook or on the wall of the local gym. What they didn't see was how everything inside the house revolved around Ashley, as if she was the sun and the rest of us just orbited in her light, or her shadow. From as far back as I could remember, Ashley was the standard. I was the cautionary tale. She could wreck the car and Dad would joke about her lead foot. I'd forget to lock the door and I'd be told I was irresponsible. I was the problem child, the one who never quite fit the family image. That first realization came early, when I was 6 and my solar system model was destroyed, and Ashley sipped her juice, uncaring, while I tried to explain what she'd done. My parents barely glanced up. "Don't leave your things where they can get broken," Dad said. "Be more careful," Mom added. Ashley didn't even have to apologize. Patterns like that dig deep roots. When Ashley borrowed my jackets and returned them stretched out, I was told to learn to share. When she threw tantrums, Mom called it a passion. "Ashley just feels things deeply, Jess," as she'd say, as if that excused everything. By high school, Ashley's power in the house was absolute. She could bump me in the hall so hard I dropped my books, and Dad would just sigh and tell me to watch where I was going. Once, when I got asked to prom before she did, Ashley cut up my dress with scissors. My parents bought me another one, but never once confronted her. "That's just how sisters are," a mom said, pinning the hem on the replacement, as if violence and jealousy were a rite of passage. But the army had taught me different. I'd learned the value of truth, of standing your ground, of being seen. Now, lying on the hardwood, broken but not defeated, I made myself a promise. This time, Ashley wasn't going to get away with it. As I lay on the landing, trying to steady my breathing, memories from years ago surfaced, unbidden and sharp. My parents' house on the north side of Chicago looked picture-perfect from the outside. Neatly trimmed hedges, American flag waving gently in the breeze, Christmas lights strung up right after Thanksgiving every year. But inside, the air bent around Ashley. She set the temperature for everyone. When I was little, people would stop my mother at the grocery store to tell her how lucky she was to have 2 daughters so close in age. "You must be best friends," they'd gush. My mom would smile, but the truth was, Ashley and I were rarely friends, and never equals. From my first memories, I was the one who got blamed when things went wrong, the one told to be the bigger person. Ashley was the golden child, curly honey-blonde hair, my mother's eyes, my father's charisma. She excelled at everything: dance recitals, spelling bees, school plays. Her certificates hung framed in the hallway. When Ashley won, everyone celebrated. When I did well, it was met with a parsing "a good job." I started to shrink inside myself, learning to take up as little space as possible, to avoid her attention and my parents' disappointment. My first real heartbreak wasn't over a boy. It was the morning of my science fair, age 6, when I woke up to find my painstakingly crafted solar system project, every planet painted, hung on fishing line, crushed on the kitchen floor, splattered with orange juice. Ashley stood in the doorway, sipping from her straw, watching me cry. I ran to my parents, desperate for justice, only to be met with a shrug. "Don't leave your things out," a dad said, not looking up from the paper. "Ashley, let your sister clean up," a mom added, as if that settled it. That moment, and 100 others like it, shaped me. When Ashley borrowed my new sweater and returned it stretched out, I was told to be generous. If she broke something, it was just an accident. When she called me names or snapped at me for no reason, it was a normal sibling rivalry. My anger became a silent, smoldering thing, pressed down under a sense of duty to keep the peace. As we got older, the gap only widened. By high school, Ashley was homecoming queen, captain of the volleyball team, on the shortlist for every scholarship. I joined Drock, searching for a place I could belong that wasn't determined by her shadow. For once, I found adults, my instructors, who cared about fairness, who noticed effort, not just results. I started to thrive, finally earning a ribbon for leadership that had nothing to do with Ashley. My parents barely noticed. "That's nice, honey, but what about Ashley's college applications?" Mom would say, half listening as she folded laundry. The summer before senior year, Ashley got a speeding ticket. My dad laughed about her need for speed, it paying the fine himself. The week after, I forgot to close the garage door one night and woke up to a lecture about discipline, responsibility, and not making the whole family look bad. Sometimes I wondered if I was even visible at all. In the army, everything changed. I traded Chicago's bitter winters for Fort Benning's thick southern heat. My first months were a blur of PT at dawn, aching muscles, dirt, and sweat. Nobody cared about family reputation. If you could handle your gear, hit the mark at the range, and keep your word, you belonged. For the first time in my life, I felt respected, not because of my last name, but because I'd earned it. I loved the camaraderie, the sense of purpose. My unit became my family, my battle buddies like siblings who had my back no matter what. I learned to trust myself, to speak up, to lead. I deployed overseas twice, sore fear, loss, exhaustion, but also hope. The army gave me more than a career. It gave me a backbone. That's what made coming home so hard. My last tour ended with an injury, a bad shoulder after a Humvee accident outside Kandahar. I'd planned to rehab at the VA in San Diego, but the waiting list was long. Mom offered the guest room back in Chicago. "It'll be good for you to rest at home for a while," as she'd said, almost gently, as if inviting a stranger, not her own daughter. I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet and figured out my next move. But walking through the door that first night, with Ashley still living there, I felt like I'd stepped into a time warp. Her room was twice the size of mine, decorated like an Instagram influencer's page, white lights, velvet pillows, a new vanity. She worked part-time at a high-end clothing boutique downtown, spent the rest of her time in the house, acting like she ran the place. She cornered me in the kitchen the first morning. "How long are you planning on mooching off Mom and Dad?" she asked, all fake sweetness. "Just until I get the VA stuff sorted," I replied, keeping my voice even. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good luck with that in this economy," she said, brushing past me, leaving her coffee cup in the sink for someone else to clean up. Every day after that was like walking through a minefield. Ashley made digs about my job search, rolled her eyes at my physical therapy routine, interrupted my phone interviews by blasting music or using the bathroom at the worst possible moments. At dinner, she'd make little jokes about a hero time and how we civilians have it so easy, My parents let it slide, if they noticed at all. The house was too small to avoid her, and the pressure built up, slow and steady, like a thunderstorm you can feel in your bones long before the clouds roll in. The days in my parents' house slipped into a slow-motion grind, each one blending into the next, each one chipping away a little more at the sense of self I'd rebuilt in the army. At first, I tried to focus on practical things: physical therapy appointments at the VA hospital, job applications, networking with other veterans. My shoulder throbbed most mornings, a dull reminder of what I'd survived. I told myself that was temporary, just like this living arrangement. But the tension in the house never let up. Ashley seemed to find new ways to remind me who was in charge. She'd borrow my chargers and never return them. Leave hair products in the shower so thick the drain clogged, accuse me of using up the last of the milk. Every small thing became a battle. I'd come downstairs to find my paperwork for an interview gone from the kitchen table. Ashley had shoved it aside to make room for her makeup kit. If I said anything, she'd claim I was overreacting. The worst was when I'd schedule a phone interview and she'd pick that moment to run the blender for her kale smoothies or put on a reality show at full volume. The few times I tried to ask her to be quiet, she'd just smirk and say, "Hey, it's not my fault you're unemployed, Jess." Dinner was even harder. My father, exhausted from work, sat at the head of the table, reading legal briefs on his phone. My mother, distracted by managing her coffee shop's social media, let conversation drift. If I mentioned my progress with the VA or a callback from a veterans nonprofit, Ashley would jump in with a sarcastic, "Is that before or after your afternoon nap?" Mom would shush her, but never more than that. One evening, after a particularly tough session with my physical therapist, I came home to find Ashley in a meltdown over her friend cancelling a trip to Vegas. She slammed her door so hard a picture fell off the hallway wall. I picked it up, put it back, and let the anger slide away, just like I'd done 100 times before. I'd learned in the army when to stand your ground and when to bide your time. But the more time I spent at home, the smaller I felt. The sense of purpose I'd had in uniform faded a little more every day. My independence, the thing I'd fought so hard for, felt fragile. Still, I refused to be beaten. I found a rhythm in the chaos. I'd wake up early, before anyone else was up, and run through my exercises. I'd make coffee, help my mom tidy up the kitchen, and then head to a nearby cafe with free Wi-Fi, working on my resume while the city buzzed to life outside. For a few hours, I could pretend I was just another young woman on the move, not a sideline soldier trying to get her life back on track. My closest friend from my unit, Sarah, checked in almost every day. She'd been through her own battles with civilian life after deployment, so she knew how hard it was to go from total autonomy to living by someone else's rules. "You're tougher than she is, Jess," as Sarah would remind me. "You've got grit. Just get through this chapter. It's not forever." But at home, the air thickened. Ashley seemed to resent my very existence. If I came home with groceries, she'd pick through the bags and take what she wanted. If I cooked, she'd complain about the smell. She told our parents that I was using up too much hot water, leaving my boots in the hallway, hogging the washer. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. To them, Ashley's word carried weight. It all came to a head the night my dad decided to check in ear on my job search. We were halfway through dinner when Ashley, spooning mashed potatoes onto her plate, said, "And maybe the army should teach a class on how to find a real job. Here, Jess." My dad, without looking up, murmured, Ashley," but there was a smirk in his voice. I set down my fork, fighting to stay calm. "I've had a few good interviews. I'm making progress. Ashley leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. Maybe the problem isn't the job market. Maybe it's you. Mom looked down, pretending not to hear. Dad just went back to his phone. That night, I called Sarah from the backyard, pacing between the dying tomato plants. I don't know how much more of this I can take, I admitted. It's like I'm invisible. Or worse, I'm a burden. Sarah's answer was simple. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. You did harder things in the field than you'll ever have to do here. You just have to make it out. The days grew colder as summer faded into fall. My shoulder healed, slowly, and I pushed myself to keep applying, keep moving forward. Some days I wanted to disappear, to just pack a bag and leave, consequences be damned. But part of me was stubborn. This wasn't going to be the story of how Ashley pushed me out again. And all the while, beneath the surface, the tension with Ashley simmered, just waiting for the spark that would finally set everything off. The tension in our house wasn't just a background hum anymore, it became the soundtrack of every day. By October, Chicago's winds had picked up, rattling the old windows, as if the house itself wanted to shake off the weight of all our secrets. Inside, the air felt charged, like static before a thunderstorm. Ashley's moods swung wider than ever. After a messy breakup with her on-and-off boyfriend, who stormed out during a brunch at the coffee shop, she became even more volatile. For days she sulked, slamming doors, leaving trails of used tissues and empty soda cans behind her. She monopolized the bathroom before my job interviews, hogged the mirror, and accidentally unplugged the internet router right before my video call with a veterans nonprofit in Evanston. When I called her out, she shrugged. It's not my fault your life is falling apart. Our parents noticed the tension, but only in the shallowest sense. My mother would sigh, Can't you two just get along? You're both adults. But she'd never press Ashley. My father kept himself busy with work, rarely engaging unless forced. When he did, his solutions always fell on me. I shoulda tried to be the bigger person, not provoke Ashley. Understand she's been under a lot of stress lately. It was like being told to dodge raindrops in a hurricane. My only solace was my growing friendship with Megan, a neighbor a few blocks over, another veteran, who worked as a paramedic. We'd met at the VA during a support group session. She understood the feeling of being the odd one out in your own family. Megan would invite me for coffee, long walks along the lake, or just a quiet evening watching old movies. With her, I felt seen. She reminded me I was more than my family's scapegoat. At home, though, the storm was building. Ashley's public persona was still flawless. Instagram full of brunches and carefully curated selfies, glowing work reviews, posts about his sisterhood. But in private, she seemed to enjoy undermining me more and more. Sometimes I wondered if she remembered the time in high school when she'd ruined my prom dress and my parents just bought me a new one, never asking her for an explanation. One Saturday, Ashley's bitterness found a new target. She barged into the kitchen just as I was preparing for a Zoom interview with a military contractor looking for project managers. Are you still pretending you have a real job lined up? She sneered, grabbing her green juice from the fridge. It's called trying, I answered, fighting to keep my tone even. She rolled her eyes. You think a couple years in the army makes you qualified for anything? All you did was follow orders. I led a team of 12 people under fire, I said, not to boast, just to remind her, and myself, of what I'd achieved. Ashley made a face. Whatever helps you sleep at night. That afternoon, as if to punctuate the point, she hosted a group of friends in the living room. They laughed and gossiped loudly while I struggled to finish a cover letter in the kitchen. At one point, I overheard Ashley say, "And my sister thinks she's such a badass, but she can't even land a desk job." Her friends laughed. The words stung. The next morning, my mother found me making coffee before dawn. "You know, Jessica, things were peaceful before you moved back," as she said, soft but pointed. "Ashley gets stressed easily. I wish you'd both try harder." My anger boiled over. "I'm trying, Mom. But you always take a side, no matter what." She looked hurt. "That's not fair." "It's true," I replied. "You never ask her to stop. You just expect me to keep the peace." We stood in silence, the old clock ticking in the hallway. Then she left, saying nothing else. I spent the rest of the day out, walking through Millennium Park, letting the wind clear my head, calling Megan for advice. "You don't have to stay in a place that breaks you," and Megan reminded me. "You've survived much worse. Don't let them take your dignity." By the time I got home, Ashley was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, acting like nothing had happened. I ignored her, went upstairs, and started packing a small bag, just in case. But I couldn't leave yet. Not until I'd found a job and a place to land. Besides, I wanted closure. I wanted my parents to finally see the truth. The storm had to break. A few days later, everything came to a head at dinner. Ashley, in rare form, began mocking my military experience, calling it a Jess's big adventure. My father, for once, looked up from his phone. "That's enough," he said, but the damage was done. Ashley pouted, left the table, and slammed her door so hard the pictures rattled. After dinner, my mom said, Can't you apologize? Just once, Jess, for the sake of family?" I stared at her. I'm not the one who needs to apologize. It was the first time I didn't back down. And it wouldn't be the last. The morning that changed everything started out deceptively peaceful. The house was unusually quiet. Dad had left early for court. Mom was at the coffee shop preparing for a local fundraiser. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching specks of dust in the air, making the old staircase glow. For the first time in days, I let myself relax. I made a fresh pot of coffee, sent out 2 more job applications, and put on my most comfortable jeans. Maybe today would be different. But there was a heaviness in the air I couldn't quite shake. Years of military training had sharpened my instincts. Sometimes, you just know when something isn't right. I walked upstairs to change clothes before heading out for a run. As I stepped into the hallway, Ashley was waiting, arms crossed, ice cold as blue ice. She blocked the path to the bathroom. "Did you enjoy humiliating me at dinner last night?" Her voice was low, almost trembling with restrained anger. I kept my distance, staying calm. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you. You crossed a line. I just stood up for myself." Her nostrils flared. "You always act so smug, Jess. Like you're better than me because you played soldier. Because you actually left and did something. You think that makes you superior?" "I don't want to argue, Ashley. Just move." She didn't. "Make me," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. I tried to step around her, my hand raised in a defensive, peacekeeping gesture, nothing aggressive, nothing threatening. But Ashley's eyes flashed with something wild. She shoved me, hard, both hands, straight into my chest. Everything happened in a blur. My boots slipped on the polished wood. Suddenly I was falling, tumbling head over heels down the entire flight of stairs. I hit the steps again and again. Shoulder, hip, knee, back, each impact an explosion of pain. I tried to twist, to protect my head, but the world spun and spun until it finally stopped with me crumpled at the bottom, winded and dazed, gasping for breath. The pain was everywhere, but my ribs and shoulder screamed loudest. For a second I couldn't even draw air. I tasted blood in my mouth. The ceiling above me seemed to sway. The chandelier spun gently as if mocking my helplessness. Then I heard Ashley's footsteps, deliberate, unhurried, descending the stairs. She stopped 2 steps above me and looked down, her face a mask of cold indifference. "Get up," she said flatly, as if I was being dramatic. I tried to push myself upright, but agony ripped through my ribs and I let out a sharp, involuntary cry. Ashley didn't flinch. Instead, she called out in a practiced, innocent voice. She slipped. "Mom, Dad, I told you those socks were dangerous." Within seconds, my father appeared at the top of the stairs, scowling down at me like I'd ruined his morning. My mother rushed in behind him, her face stricken with worry, directed not at me, but at Ashley. I tried to speak, to tell the truth, but every word stabbed at my ribs. My dad came down, knelt beside me, not to comfort me but to inspect the floor. "You need to be more careful, Jessica. Those socks could have killed you," he said, tone-clipped and impersonal. I managed to whisper, "We should call an ambulance." But Dad shook his head. "No need for drama. I'll drive you to the hospital myself." He told my mother to stay home with Ashley, she's been through enough for one day. As my father helped me up, his grip was more about control than support. Every step hurt. Through the doorway, I saw Ashley smirking, a small, satisfied smile, certain she'd gotten away with it again. But this time, I promised myself I wouldn't let it go. The truth was written all over my body, bruises, blood, the awkward angle of my arm. It was time someone listened. The drive to the hospital was silent except for my ragged breathing and the occasional jolt of pain from every bump in the road. At a red light, Dad turned to me, his voice dropping into the stern, persuasive tone he used in court. "Here's what happened, Jessica. You were walking too fast down the stairs. You slipped, and you fell. That's what you'll tell the doctor. Understood?" I stared out the window, the old neighborhood passing by in a blur of red and gold leaves. "She pushed me," I said quietly, my voice shaky but clear. Dad shot me a sharp look. "Don't start with that nonsense. Do you have any idea what kind of damage a lie like that could do to this family?" My ribs throbbed. I wanted to scream, but I held it in. Wasting energy on someone who refused to hear the truth wasn't worth it, not anymore. At the hospital entrance, my dad opened my door, his hand on my arm as he guided me inside. At the ER desk, a nurse with kind eyes asked what happened. Before I could answer, I felt Dad's glare. I tripped on the stairs, I forced out, hating myself for saying it. But the nurse wrote it down and ushered me in for x-rays, telling my father to wait outside. When the doctor, a tall, no-nonsense man named Dr. Lawson, came in, he examined the scans and looked at me, his expression grave. "You have 3 fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and extensive bruising. These injuries don't look like a simple fall. Is there something you want to tell me? I hesitated. Then, for the first time, I let the truth out. My sister pushed me. Dr. Lawson nodded, his voice steady. That's what I suspected. I'll need to notify the authorities. This isn't just an accident, Jessica. Relief and fear warred inside me. For the first time, someone believed me. The ER was a blur of white lights, antiseptic smells, and the low thrum of voices. For once, I wasn't alone. Dr. Lawson's calm, steady manner became an anchor as he explained my injuries in plain, professional language: 3 fractured ribs on my right side, a dislocated shoulder, deep contusions along my spine and hip. The X-rays told a story my family never wanted to hear. These fractures, this bruising, it's not consistent with slipping on stairs, a Dr. Lawson said, pointing to the images. It looks like you were pushed with significant force. I nodded, biting back the urge to cry. He paused, checking my eyes. Jessica, I'm a mandated reporter. When I see evidence of assault, especially domestic, I have to notify social services and law enforcement. For the first time since my fall, I felt a flicker of something like hope. Maybe, just maybe, the cycle could break. Within half an hour, a social worker named Karen entered the exam room. She wore sensible shoes and had a steady, soothing presence, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself, then gently asked me to tell her what happened, in my own words. I described Ashley blocking the hallway, her sudden, angry shove, the sickening tumble, the cold satisfaction on her face as she watched me crumple at the bottom of the stairs. I told her about my parents' refusal to call an ambulance, their decision to control the story before I even left the house. My voice shook as I admitted how many times Ashley had hurt me before. Shoves, insults, ruined projects, always covered by lies or silence. Karen listened intently, taking careful notes, asking gentle clarifying questions. When I finished, she said, Jessica, what you're describing is assault. Because it happened in your home and involved a family member, it's considered domestic violence. Are you safe to return home tonight? The answer was immediate. No. Not if Ashley's there. Not if my parents are covering for her. Outside the room, I heard my father's voice, angry, urgent, demanding to see me, insisting there was some mistake. Dr. Lawson's calm reply cut through. Jessica is under our care. Hospital protocol takes precedence. Karen assured me. They can't come in unless you give permission. You're safe here. Then she explained that an officer would arrive soon to take my statement, and that I could request a protective order if I wished. Numbness gave way to a strange kind of determination. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I was tired of carrying this weight alone, tired of peace at the cost of my own safety. A female officer, Daniels, arrived not long after, tall and direct, her uniform crisp. She pulled up a chair, positioned herself so she could see both me and the door, and began. Tell me everything, from the moment you saw your sister in the hallway to your arrival here. Her questions were precise. Where exactly had Ashley's hands landed? What did she say? How did my parents react? Had there been previous incidents? As I recounted the details, something cracked open inside me. I told her about the earlier times, Ashley shoving me into walls, slamming doors on my hands, throwing things when she didn't get her way. I described the destroyed science projects, the ruined dress, the bruises always chalked up to a roughhousing. I spoke about my parents' constant refrain: don't provoke her, keep the peace, be the bigger person. Officer Daniels documented everything, photographing my bruises and shoulder, requesting copies of the X-rays. She explained the process step by step, making sure I understood. I had grounds for assault charges, I'd be connected to a victim advocate, I could access resources for temporary housing if needed. Through the open door, I glimpsed my parents in the hallway, my father pacing, jaw tight, my mother with arms crossed, both looking ready for a courtroom battle rather than a family crisis. For the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of control. They could tell their story to neighbors, but in this sterile hospital room, my voice would finally matter. When Officer Daniels left, Karen stayed. She helped me outline a safety plan and gave me her direct number. "Call me if anyone pressures you to change your story," as she said, squeezing my hand. As night fell, I lay in my hospital bed, bandaged and sore, phone on the nightstand. By morning, my mother had called 3 times, leaving voicemails that swung between pleading and accusatory. "Jessica, this has gone too far. The police were here. Your father is beside himself. Ashley said it was just an accident. You're blowing this out of proportion. Come home so we can sort it out as a family." Her words, familiar and sharp, filled me with equal parts sadness and anger. For once, I didn't answer. Instead, I texted Megan, "Need a place for a few days. Everything's out in the open now." I finally told the truth. Megan replied instantly, "My couch is yours. I'm proud of you, Jess. Don't look back." The days that followed were a blur of medical appointments, interviews with social workers, and phone calls from family that alternated between threats and guilt trips. Dad threatened to cut off my phone, freeze my bank account, report my car as stolen. Ashley, naturally, kept silent, letting others fight her battle. But the more they pushed, the more I realized I'd already survived far worse than family anger. I wasn't that powerless girl anymore. My story was out. This time, there would be consequences, and not just for me. 6 weeks passed in a haze of hospital visits, lawyer meetings, and paperwork. I moved in with Megan, whose cozy apartment above a bakery became my safe haven. The nights were hardest, my ribs ached, panic attacks jolted me awake, but Megan was always there with strong coffee and a calm word. Meanwhile, my family fought back with everything they had. My dad called every day, sometimes threatening, sometimes pleading. My mom left voicemails, "You're ruining the family. This will destroy Ashley's future. Think about what you're doing." They refused to let Megan pick up my things from the house. My phone plan was cut off. My car, still in Dad's name, was reported stolen until I handed it over. But I'd found my voice. With help from a victim's advocate, I hired a lawyer, Catherine. "This is textbook behavior," as she told me, laying out their intimidation tactics. "They want to isolate you so you'll back down. But you're not alone. Not anymore." As the legal case built, the truth that had been buried for years began to surface. Catherine subpoenaed my medical history, old ER visits for broken fingers, concussions, sprains, injuries my parents had always explained away. Now, doctors saw a pattern, not accidents, but repeated harm. Megan reminded me about an old doorbell camera I'd stashed after moving back home. On it was grainy footage from a few months earlier, Ashley shoving me on the porch during an argument. It didn't show the staircase fall, but it proved her aggression and my restraint. Catherine said it was exactly the kind of evidence that tips a case. My support grew. A former neighbour recalled hearing fights and my father telling us to keep it down. An old teacher remembered seeing Ashley threaten me in the parking lot. Even Ashley's ex-boyfriend spoke up, describing her temper and the time she threw a glass at him in public. We organised binders of evidence, photos of bruises, text messages, witness statements, doctor's notes. I practiced my testimony at night, reading it aloud until my voice didn't shake. The day of the hearing arrived on a chill November morning. Megan drove me to the courthouse, her hand steady on my shoulder. Catherine met us inside, calm and composed, reminding me, stay focused on the truth. That's your power. In the courtroom, my parents sat on one side with Ashley and their lawyer, their faces a wall of composure. Across the aisle, I took my seat beside Catherine and Megan, my hands trembling slightly but my resolve hard as steel. The judge, a woman in her 60s, with kind but sharp eyes, called the hearing to order. Catherine began with a summary: medical records, x-rays, witness testimony, a pattern of enabling and repeated abuse. Dr. Lawson testified first. These fractures show multiple impact points, consistent with a forward shove followed by repeated blunt force, far more than a typical fall. When Ashley's lawyer suggested I'd simply lost my balance, Dr. Lawson didn't flinch. The patterns are distinct, he insisted. When it was my turn, I kept my eyes on Catherine. I told my story from the beginning, Ashley blocking my path, her words, the shove, the pain. I spoke about the years of small cruelties, the ruined projects, the silence from my parents, my attempts to keep the peace. The cross-examination was sharp, questions about jealousy, job stress, family drama. I answered each one steadily, never letting them twist my words. Ashley took the stand, her performance as flawless as ever. She claimed I tried to push past her and slipped. My parents nodded in support. But their story began to unravel when Catherine called our old neighbour and Ashley's ex-boyfriend, who described her violent outbursts. Then came Maria, my mom's former employee, who described seeing Ashley shove me, twice, with my mother watching and blaming me both times. Finally, Catherine played the doorbell camera footage. There, in front of everyone, was Ashley shoving me on the porch. The room went silent. Closing arguments were brief. Catherine emphasized the consistency of evidence and corroborating witnesses. Ashley's lawyer tried to play on family loyalty, painting it all as a tragic misunderstanding. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. I sat with Megan, staring at the tabletop, barely breathing. When the judge returned, she looked at Ashley, my parents, and finally me. Based on the testimony and evidence, I find clear and convincing evidence of a pattern of domestic violence perpetrated by Ashley, with enabling behavior by the parents. A 2-year restraining order will be issued. Ashley is to complete anger management therapy. I am referring this to the district attorney for further investigation. Her gavel fell, and just like that, the silence was broken. My parents looked shell-shocked. Ashley's face was a mask of anger and disbelief. Outside, local reporters snapped photos, asked questions I didn't answer. Megan and Catherine walked me past them, out into the cold, bright morning. In the days that followed, news spread quickly. Ashley lost her job at the boutique. My mother's coffee shop lost business. My father stopped attending community events. Extended family called with messages ranging from concern to outrage to quiet support. But for the first time in my life, I felt light. My truth was on the record. No one could erase it now. I found a part-time job with a veterans outreach program, started therapy, and slowly, the pain in my ribs faded. Megan and I spent evenings sorting through old photos and talking about everything I wanted to build next. One day, I found a picture of Ashley and me as kids, smiling on the same staircase where she'd tried to break me. I tucked it away, a reminder of how far I'd come. I knew the old wounds would take time to heal, but now, the healing was finally possible. My new beginning wasn't flashy. It was quiet, deliberate, and, at last, mine.